Hey everybody, this is Adam Seltzer, and welcome to the first episode of Mysterious Chicago. You might remember me from such previous podcasts as Chicago Unbelievable and also the old Weird Chicago podcast, if you want to go way back. I spent the last 10 years working for various ghost tour companies around the city, and now I've started my own company called Mysterious Chicago Tours. Check us out at mysteriouschicago.com. It's a wide variety of tours beyond just ghost tours. There's Unsolved Mysteries, Grave Robbing 101, The Darker Side of Taylor Street, The Civil War in Chicago, Gangs of Chicago, Chicago Crime, all sorts of different things that I put together. I spend more time than I should probably admit hanging out in the microfilm room, reading old newspapers. Some of them you can get online, but the real gems are buried in the old defunct Chicago papers that you have to get on microfilm. And there's still plenty that I can get in the old Chicago Tribune is online, parts of the Chicago Daily Inter-Ocean are online, the photo archive of the Chicago Daily News you can get from a couple of different sources. I spend so much time in these places I don't even want to say, but in doing this we come up with all kinds of great stories that extend way beyond just ghost lore. So welcome along. This is the whole new version of it. MysteriousChicago.com is the webpage. Check us out. Private tours available all the time at rates lower than most people are charging for bus tours these days. But I was reading through a theatrical promoter's memoir today in which he talks about building a theater in Chicago in 1893 for the World's Fair. And he mentions that just about everybody in Chicago thought that they were going to become millionaires because of that fair. And, why not? There were 27 million paid admissions to that fair. And this is in an age when that was the equivalent of about half the population of the United States. If you were selling anything, there was a market for your product coming to town. Of course, what they didn't realize was there was also a financial panic of 1893 coming to town. There's a reason we talk about the Great Depression and call it the Great Depression. There had been several other mini depressions and panics all through the previous century beforehand. Now, we know that some of the famous stories about people who saw the World's Fair as an opportunity. H.H. Holmes is probably the best known, though the story we tell about him is not really entirely true. We do know that he tried to cash in on the fair. He got involved in some swindles with some of the real higher-ups in the fair organization, in fact. But most famously, in 1892, he added a third story to his building to use as hotel rooms during the 1893 fair. But as near as I can tell, he never used those as hotel rooms. The third floor was built, it was really little more than a facade. It might as well have been made out of papier-mâché, really. He had borrowed $3,000 from a guy on the second floor to build it. He never paid it back. Once he had this new floor, he used that to buy furniture, flooring, bedding, mattresses, crockery, all sorts of stuff on credit, because he said, hey, I'm building a hotel. You should give me all this stuff on credit. I'm going to get rich, and then I'll pay you back. But then he never paid them back. And he also took out a ton of insurance policies, and he tried to cash in on all of them when there was a fire in that hotel, just 2.5 months into the fair. So the story of him building a hotel to kill fair patrons is really just something that came out of a New York tabloid. He saw the fair as a chance to swindle, which is not to say that he didn't kill anybody in the process. There were already secret passages built into the place on the first and second floor. What I really want to talk about today is another World's Fair era building that was full of secret passages. I mentioned everybody thought they were going to cash in on the fair, and one of them was this guy known as Zanzik, who Houdini called him the Charlatan Supreme. He had a house that was known, I don't think it was known by an official name. Houdini called it a spiritualistic studio. What we know about this story all comes from an article that Houdini wrote in the 1920s for MUM, M-U-M, a magazine for the Society of American Magicians. It was a trade rag, really. He said that he got his information from a magician named Ziska, who worked in the place. It's hard to verify the story beyond that. There were multiple magicians named Zanzik or Zanzig over the years, including another one in Chicago, in fact, which muddies the waters considerably. But according to Houdini's story, in 1893, this Zanzik, under the name Professor Slater, bought a house somewhere on Michigan Avenue and fitted it up as a spiritualistic studio. Now, spiritualism, the practice where we could all hold hands and talk to the dead, wasn't quite as popular as in 1893 as it had been a decade or three before. In fact, the Tribune even talked about old-time spiritualists. But going to seances was still a thing, and there was a spiritualist convention in the city that year, I think. And just to be clear, no one is suggesting that this Zanzik fellow was the real deal. Even most spiritualists knew and know that most of the people holding seances were total tricksters. And Zanzik certainly was. This place had a trap door underneath the seance table. Underneath that, there was a secret room where a couple of pro-magicians could work all sorts of mechanical tricks to make messages appear on slates, inside of envelopes that everyone thought were sealed. Every trick in the trade, only better. They employed private detectives to follow potential clients around and learn all about them. They even used to have carrier pigeons with messages tied to their legs who could fly into a person's shoulder with a message that they'd say was from the dead. And according to Houdini, 8 times out of 10, the message seemed relevant to the people. And we can kind of see how this works. Nowadays, there are a lot of ghost hunting apps that you can get for your iPhone that pull words out of the air. And they say that there's like spirit box technology, or that they're using something out of the quantum flux, which is a real thing. It's just, I don't think you can really measure it accurately with an iPhone. But it'll be, you walk around with these apps and it'll pull words out of the air, and people will take them on my tours quite a lot. And I let myself have fun with it as much as anybody does. But the challenge to me, it's kind of an interesting writing exercise, is they'll come up with these words and I'll try to come up with a way that that word might be relevant. An interesting example is actually one of the ones that I thought was kind of interesting is one time I sat in on a ghost investigation that was going on in Lincoln Park, which of course was the old city cemetery. And a group of ghost hunters had rented out the entire park. And I didn't really go to investigate ghosts. I just went to demonstrate tomb snooping, how we see inside of the couch tomb. And the couch tomb is the one remaining mausoleum that is still there from the old city cemetery. It's a mystery in and of itself that I'm sure I'll be talking about on this podcast eventually. It was the tomb built for Ira Couch in 1858. And they had one of these spirit box things. We held it up. I helped them slide it under the door of the couch tomb. And they asked out loud, Mr. Couch, can you tell us who the president is? And the word that came up was slave, which was an interesting thing. There's a couple of ways you can interpret that. One is that if you died in 1857, 1858, that might be how you perceive Obama. And also, if you are talking about politics to somebody who died in the late 1850s, go read a newspaper from the late 1850s. There was no political conversation you could have that didn't turn into a discussion about slavery. You couldn't argue about zoning disputes in the North without it turning into a discussion about slavery after a while. But really, this is just kind of the exercise that we do, where we take these random words and try to apply them. That's what people would do in Zanzig's studio. They would get like a fortune cookie type of fortune tied to a carrier pigeon, and figure out a way that applied to whatever they were trying to find out. Now, the big feature in Zanzig's spiritualistic studio was what they called a materialization room, where they would make it look like spirits were really showing up. This involved some black velvet curtains, black velvet bags suspended over a fishing pole, hiding places for assistants, phosphorus-covered clothes. It was particularly risky to do this sort of thing for charlatans. Making the spirits show up was really pushing it, because it was so easy for people to get caught doing this. Now, here's the real legend, the real thing that happened at Zanzig's studio that really helped him pass into legend. Now, one day this guy showed up and said that he was suffering from bad eyes and looking for some sort of a spiritualistic cure. And according to Houdini's article, Zanzig sold him some goop that he said was like a magic charm or spiritually charged for $25. Said to rub it over your eyes, and if it works, send me $500. Now, all this stuff was mud from the gutter, and he sold it for $25. That alone is quite a feat, and I don't know if it was the placebo effect or what, but according to Houdini's article, the guy ended up sending a check for $1,000. It worked that well. And this customer was so thrilled that he came back and asked Zanzig if he could arrange a seance so that he could see his late wife again. And here's where it gets really good. Zanzig got some photos of the guy's wife, probably from the guy himself, and he found a woman who looked enough like her to play her in the materialization room. And this guy was so thrilled with that materialization that he asked for another seance, and this time, and here's where it gets really good, this one was going to be a conjugal visit. The guy was trying to arrange to sleep with the ghost of his dead wife. So Zanzig, being a charlatan supreme in Houdini's saying, of course said yes. He asked him for a week to prepare, asked for some huge fee that is not specified in the article, but you can bet your sweet butt it wasn't a small fee. They arranged for someone, we can only imagine what kind of employee they would have sought out for this, and then warned him not to spend too long in the bridal chamber they had set up, because if after an hour she was going to dematerialize, and for him to be touching her while she dematerialized was horribly risky. But they set it up. They got somebody to play the ghost of his dead wife, darkened the room enough that they were able to trick him. But right in the middle of the conjugal visit, Zanzig and his assistants were all sitting around patting themselves on the back and counting their money, and while they did, they heard a scream. The guy had died of a heart attack while in the middle of having sex with what he thought was the ghost of his wife. So, the best laid plans, I guess. And they tried to just dump the body out, but I guess they got caught in the process and had to do unspecified things to evade imprisonment. And presumably they paid a few bribes. Now, there's a couple of mysteries regarding this. Now, the first one, of course, is, did this ever actually happen? All we really have to back it up is Houdini's story. Now, he gives a lot of names in it. Besides citing Ziska as a source, he mentions Will Robinson, who was a fairly well-known magician himself, as he was supposedly one of the assistants. There are a couple other books that talk about this that mentioned that Zanzig was all financed by a guy named Sam Bailey, though I don't know what their source is on that one. So there's enough data and named sources here that I'm at least inclined to hope that it was all true, even if it means somebody had to die for the story to be true. I really hope that story was true. Now, mystery number 2, assuming the place was real to begin with, where was this house? My guess would be North Michigan Avenue. When you're doing charlatan tricks like this, you want to be in a reasonably well-to-do area. But then again, all that Houdini says is Michigan Avenue. That could be just about anything. So data is so scarce. But theoretically, since we don't know where the house was, that means there's just a chance that this spiritualistic studio is still standing. Now, all Houdini says is that he fitted up a house on Michigan Avenue. This is a house that was already in place. It was already built to be lived in. So it could not only be real, but actually still standing. There could be some townhouse on Michigan Avenue someplace, or even just some regular-looking house on the south side that has a trapdoor in the floor leading into a strange little room down beneath. There could be a house there with the hiding places still built in. So, listen, folks, is this your house? Do you live on Michigan Avenue and have a house about like this one? Is it old enough that it was standing in 1893? If so, please do get in touch. Anyway, so this has been our first episode. We're going to be doing a lot more of these than I did for Chicago Unbelievable and previously. We're still going to do episodes where we go out and investigate places and talk to special guests. Also, Hector and I, my co-host, we're going to be starting a radio show of our own. We were offered a radio show on a regular terrestrial radio show, WLPN. We're going to do a show called The Derelict Theater, where we talk about Chicago history stuff. We'll talk to special guests from around Chicago. And also every week there's going to be a live original radio drama. This is going to be on WLPN radio here in Chicago. And of course we'll put it up for podcasts as well. But this is the new Mysterious Chicago podcast, episode number 1. The music is graciously provided by a band called Stiffs Incorporated. They were one of my favorite bands in high school. They're one of my favorite bands now. They broke up in 1998, unfortunately, after 2 fantastic albums. This is from their second album. It is a song called, one of their instrumental tracks called Outro to the Egress. Today we would call them a steampunk band. In those days we didn't really have that term. They were usually known as Victorian punk, or they once called themselves post-Orwellian rock. Anyway, my name is Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, mysteriouschicago.com. Take it away, Stiffs Incorporated.